Good evening and welcome to the Board of Finance regular meeting, June 17, 2025. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. We will begin tonight with the Finance Director's report. We'll start with Amy. Here on for those following, we're starting on page 1.
So just a quick update under the approved supplemental appropriations. The Aquarian amount increased from the last meeting by $282,000. The board had approved a supplemental at the last meeting for some of the paving work that the town had done and Aquarian had refunded. So just a small update there.
Amy, wait, can you tell me about that? I thought it was only $250.
No, it's $282,500.
Why is it saying $900?
Because that was added to the previous one that we had already done earlier in the year. So that was the increase, is the $282,500. Under the grant applications and awards, the deputy town manager notified me today that the brownfield redevelopment grant that we applied for is no longer pending and it has been officially denied. So
What was that for? What?
the brownfield grant.
At the Wagner property for environmental remediation chair. Unfortunately, we were working with the developer in a kind of a partnership to help them try to get that funding. We don't believe it's gonna delay the project. It was just a kind of a Hail Mary.
And then on to the pooled investments, you can see the Connecticut stiff rate compared to the prior month report went from 4.51% down to 4.48%. So those interest rates starting to come down, which obviously not great news for the investment income, but great as we are anticipating going out bonding soon. So hopefully some good news on the bonding side at least. Under the financial summary, on page 5, we have added a new column that says fiscal year 25 projected. So you'll see on that page 5 on that last column that the general fund revenue is currently projected at about 125 million. This will be about 2.5 over budget. Pretty consistent with where we projected during the quarterly. I'll go through the overall when I get to expenditures, but on the revenue side of that 2.5, the same themes as previously reported, about 1.2 in tax collections, 400,000 in building permits, about 850,000 over for investment income, and then about 230,000 in excess for Board of Education tuition.
Amy, just for members of the public, when you say revenue is over budget, that's a good thing. It means we're getting more revenue than we anticipated.
Correct.
Okay. Questions on revenues before we move on?
Moving on to expenditures on page 8. Again, we added a projected column. These projections are the same projections that you saw at the last quarterly, just because we have thousands of lines of accounts and doing that on a monthly basis is just very time consuming. So we stuck with the projections through the end of the quarter with any major updates. No major updates compared to the last quarterly. We're still anticipated an overall surplus of about 2.6 million, which includes about a $400,000 deficit on the Board of Ed side.
Amy, they said at their last meeting that
So if we remove the deficit, our surplus without the Board of Ed deficit will be around $3 million. This is pretty consistent with the last quarterly. The last quarterly I had reported about 2.4 million surplus, including the Board of Ed deficit, and without the Board of Ed deficit about 2.8 million. So about 3 million compared to 2.8 million. So we're still in the same ballpark projection wise for our surplus.
Just to advise our board, so at the Board of Ed meeting, they did authorize Matt to use the non-lapsing fund to make up that deficit, so it doesn't have to come from Mark's budget. So that will give us the surplus.
And then the same drivers on the expenditure side, for about a $500,000 surplus on the town side overall, not including the Board of Ed. If you include the Board of Ed, it's about $100,000 surplus on the expenditure side. And again, more of the same related to staffing vacancies, making this up mostly in the police department. And then the planning department had been understaffed for quite some time and now they are actually at full capacity.
Not anymore.
Minus a part-time person that we took for my office in tax, and now they're gonna go find somebody else.
Amy, one of the things I was wondering if you could add for next time, just because I had trouble with this time. When you have budgeted expenditures, you have the amended budget, you had put the amendments, can you put just a column, the approved budget, so that we can see and then just know, like we did some transfers in February, just note the transfers so that I don't lose track. Thank you. So that way when the citizens compare what was passed to what we're looking at, they at least see the same numbers and see that it was changed and that we amended the budget. Okay.
Any questions on expenditures?
I thought this was very good. I think you really done a great job with quarterlies and monthlies. I think they really tell a lot of information. We can see where things are going. I think the fiscal notes are particularly helpful and appreciate those. Right, a couple quick things before we move on. And I forgot to mention this to you when we called. Amy, our actuary said she was close to finishing the valuation reports. When you get those, can you forward those along
I will send them over this week. She sent them to me, I think yesterday maybe. I will forward them along, and then I talked to her today and she gave me the Cliff Notes version, which is if we're going to make an extra contribution, make it towards the pension funds, not the OPEB. But again, I have no context for that because I haven't reviewed the report yet, so I will send it along.
An extra what?
An extra contribution to the pensions, not the OPEB, if we're going to make an extra contribution.
Oh, to do it to the pensions. Okay, so that was my next question for this board. Amy did send out an email which none of us responded to. So I'll put it as on the thing. Our actuary had asked us what number to give as a potential contribution to the pensions. And I was thinking it would make sense to have her evaluate either a 2 million or a 1 million contribution because that's what we have. And then we can decide whether we make sense to put it there or put that towards capital reserves. We'll make that call depending on where we are, what our operating budgets are looking like. If we need to get those down, that's one way to do that. And how that changes our funding ratio. We'll have our next, I think, Todd, our next pension update is in September or
Yeah,
is
it's
that?
September 2nd.
September,
Is the-
okay.
That's the subcommittee meeting, so whatever we'll update the board meeting thereafter.
Okay, great. And then I did talk to Mark earlier today and he said we are on track to get all the numbers we need for our actuary so we can get next year's projections done in December, and also we're on track to get the audit done in a timely manner. And Amy, I know we talked about having the new auditor come in just to say, introduce themselves. Is July or August? July, okay. That's all I had as follow-ups from last meeting. Was there anything else we were needing? Okay. Then we are on to capital discussion. What you have in your packets is not a typical draft of capital, but a very, very rough draft. Talking with Mark, he had wanted us to combine the policies and make less policies, so I could put a draft for that combines the capital asset and capital and I can't remember, capital non-recurring policy into one. So that was sort of the idea behind that. The other thing I did is I sort of threw in the kitchen sink. Mark had also mentioned that he is following GFOA best practices and ICMA, so I put in some of their standards. I put in but a few things I wanted to bring to your attention. Then I said to Amy, go ahead and fix everything that I did wrong, because I put in a capital project definition and she has it as capital asset definition, which is, we probably need both, but I'm fine to keep it with capital asset, it's fine. the reason why that distinction matters is because it's what our auditors look at, what do we capitalize and what do we not. But we put non-capitalized capital sometimes in the capital budget and capitalized capital in the capital budget. So it starts to get a little confusing, but essentially this first page 11, which is page 2 of the policy, not much changes substantively. With road improvements,
Can I just
Yeah.
stop you for a moment, because we seem to have multiple copies of, or multiple drafts, and why is that?
So you have one draft copy, and then the other two policies that are in there are the policies that we have now that we're combining into the draft.
So the draft is the one that begins on page 10.
Yes. Yes. And so I told Amy, I did some stuff and I took some stuff up, I said, Amy, add whatever you want, because a lot of this first part of the policy is accounting and that's her expertise. So it's just a matter of trying to clarify the language for the public, for the boards, but comply with Amy's standards on accounting. So you'll see back and forth on that. Question of road surfacing is always interesting. Some people do repavement in their operating budget as routine maintenance. We do most of ours in the capital budget, but we don't capitalize the repaving. And can you talk about why we don't and why that matters and why we care?
So municipalities can do it one of two ways. Some municipalities capitalize all of their maintenance because it leads to a longer useful life. And then there's other municipalities that just take road maintenance as just maintenance and there is no capital asset associated with it. Simsbury has always treated the new roads as capital assets and then they're amortized over their life and they're only done once. So with any normal capital asset, you do it once. Then we expense everything else related to maintenance when we repave it. It's only a new road that comes into town where we would capitalize it. If we were to change that practice, then we start capitalizing all the roads that we repave, which is probably an accounting nightmare. Because you're breaking out all of the asphalt costs between different roads in town. I would have to have an itemized list of all of the roads. So based on past practice and what my preference is that we expense all of the maintenance associated with those roads. So it's one of those capital items where, according to our policy, it's capital in nature where it's over a threshold, so it goes into a capital project fund, but it is not a capital asset. And the reason that we distinguish this in the policy is so that when the auditors are reviewing our capital assets on an annual basis and they ask why don't you capitalize it versus why do you capitalize it, they see it's in the policy.
Does that make sense to folks? So it's mostly for accounting reasons, but we do maintenance of major projects in the capital budget, even though we don't capitalize it for accounting reasons. So it's a little bit of a quirky distinction there, but some towns do, so bringing it to your attention. I'm fine with leaving it the way it is. Amy's preference works for me.
So I'm sure the public would like to know, just what would we be doing differently for accounting purposes if we did capitalize the roads?
So we do capitalize the initial road, so say Hot Meadow, which bad example, but anyway, say it's Hot Meadow and that is a new road, we capitalize it over the amortization of I think 20 years or 50 years or whatever it is in here. And then we get to a point where it's degraded and now we need to resurface it. So if you resurface it, some people consider it maintenance because you're maintaining the road so we can use it. And then some people consider it extending the asset another 20 years. So you do another overlay and then you can start amortizing it again over another 20-year period. Please don't make me do that.
But why does it matter? I mean, why would the public care which way we do it? Is there any reason other than for accounting?
No, it's part of our balance. So our capital assets aren't even on our financial statements. It's on our because we do budgetary financial statements. It's in the financial statements of the ACFR, our audit report. It's in those financial statements and what's called like a governmental financial statement. So it gives you a holistic picture. So when you all look at your budgets, you're looking at revenues and expenditures, or perhaps your basic cash assets or investment assets. But in the government-wide financial statements, you have everything. You have your cash, you have your investments, you have your capital assets, and it gives you a holistic picture as if your town was a corporate entity where you have buildings and equipment, and it gives you a better sense to somebody that's looking to invest, so to speak, in your company of where you truly stand with all of your infrastructure on the books.
So mostly it's accounting. That's the summary for the public. You heard what Amy said, it's accounting. We're gonna leave it the way it is.
What's the state do, just out of curiosity?
I have no idea, honestly.
Yeah, so let me grab my own thing. The second thing in there that I wanted to bring to your attention is the asset disposal. We don't actually have an asset disposal policy. We have an asset disposal procedure that we've been following for many, many years. Mark, my recommendation to you, and this is really more a management issue, I mean, we can do it if you want, but I think it's more appropriate to do it through the Board of Selectmen and your board because it has policy implications, an asset disposal policy. Generally, when you dispose of an asset, it either goes to scrap, it goes to trade in value, but sometimes it's donated. And there should be a policy as who gets to donate it, how is that approved, that sort of thing. And what's the threshold, and just there, that's one of those opportunities. We're in a great position because we've got great staff who do not take advantage of it, and that's when you wanna do a good policy, but you can envision a situation where that becomes a wonderful avenue for graft.
Exactly.
So you wanna get that policy in place when we have great people, and we do, so let's get that cleaned up, so if we could do that.
That's a good point.
Then on the next page, so you'll see some of the cross out, that was the old way. Amy put in the new practice that they're doing. And just for members of the public, Amy does review the disposal request, so there is already some checks and balances, but always good to have a policy there.
Well, it seems like the policy is gonna be much easier to enforce than the current process
Well,
that's
it
in
protects
place.
Amy, actually. What it does is it protects our finance director and our town manager to make sure everyone's following it, that they're following what the policy,
This also seems a lot less cumbersome.
It is.
so hopefully
Yeah,
that,
I like that.
They can do that, and then we could update the policy in accordance with the asset disposal policy approved by the board on whatever date, we would then do that. Then I added the multi-year CIP plan. We're required to do a CIP, as you know, by charter and by state statute. I talked with Mark, I just put in language that is very typical of GFOA and ICMA. I may have actually stolen some of their language, so I do wanna acknowledge that to the public. Not all of this is my original work. But put in just sort of the definitions of what a CIP is for project for the public, and also I put in the charter provisions that it references, how it has to be approved and stuff like that. One of the things that Mark had asked us to think about is what should be the threshold in page 15G for capital projects. We don't bond below 250, is that the right number? Do we wanna change that number? For sidewalks, we have actually bonded at 200, so it may be appropriate to change it to 200. I personally would not be comfortable going below that, or we could just leave it at 250 because we're back up to 250 on the sidewalks. And Mark and Amy, do you guys have thoughts on that?
Is that for an individual item, Chair, or can we combine, this was an issue in a prior life where
So I
Had
did
a
have
limit,
something in there later on,
that's, where I'm going. And again, it's just about flexibility, I'm not suggesting.
So I did put something on that, Amy, do you know what page I did that on bond, if that's later in the thing, after the accounting?
No,
We do get to that later on. And I did show it to Mark, actually. Well, let's go through in order, and that's gonna come up and we'll review that.
That's the one I'm a little more eager to comment on.
I'm a little less flexible, but but I'm just one and maybe you can talk other people into it. Okay, the other thing I put in there, one, because Mr. Dabrowski keeps saying Simsbury Farms pays for itself, sewer does pay it for itself. Did we wanna put in the policy K, to the extent feasible, all capital projects associated with the Simsbury Farms Special Revenue Fund, the sewer use Special Revenue Fund will be financed from user fees and retained earnings from those funds. We're trying to make it self-sustaining. And I put in to the extent possible, because that may not always, so it gives you an edge if there's not enough money to do that. But right now, Simsbury Farms has a ridiculously high, I think 40% fund balance. So they can pay for their things. Sewer is at what, 100% fund balance above.
yeah, that's high.
So we could, keep that, but we're not gonna decide tonight, but give that one some thought, that's why I highlighted. But then we go on to evaluation of capital projects. This, as you know, before you were here, Mark, it's a 7-year request by the Board of Finance. And talking with you, I just put in the typical criteria that GFOA recommends. And again, I think I may have taken them directly from a GFOA thing, so boards of selectmen should consider regulatory or legal requirements, which we call mandates, public safety, asset preservation, supports adopted plans, goals and policies, maintains or improves an existing standard of service, financial considerations including bond. I mean, all the things we always think about, I just put them in because those are the standard, they're not created from me. If you look at any policy, they're almost all like that, slightly different words. So look at that, see if people are comfortable. And then here's the thing, which I think to Amy's point, and Mark, I'm open to this. We've been asking for capital to be prioritized. This is a standard way to prioritize. I chose the easiest way to do it because I figured
We appreciate that.
because we haven't been getting it. But priority A would be urgent, high priority projects that should be done if possible. And those are with your recurring revenue. So that would be the traditional payback, TAR, LoSiP, money that you get every year, definitely have to fund. And they're your top priorities. The second would be really high priorities, but we don't have the money. As soon as we get the money, that's the next tier we're gonna fund. Third, really worthwhile projects. They'll be considered if we get beyond priority A and B. And then D are lower priorities, really desirable, the community wants it, but we don't really have the money. That's a nice to have. So that might be a way, when we think about the dollars we have, if we get more grand lists, do we tap for some of these other projects?
And Chair, if I could just make a comment on this, I think, there's a strategic tie into grants as we try to do a better job of increasing grant revenue, and I know you and I have chatted about that, but if you can imagine on your list of priorities, you have something, I'll make up the numbers, you have something that's priority 4, it's $1 million project. But you have an opportunity to get a $500,000 grant if you act now, and that's, maybe it's a 50-50 match. But that's a relatively lower priority. Do you forego the opportunity to get a $500,000 grant to achieve this because you wanna spend the $500,000 on something that you prioritized higher at level 2 or level 3 under this example, right? And so this doesn't, there could be situations where that, some board or both boards need to take that into account.
So I did put in there financial considerations, including funding sources and impact of future debt service and operating costs. So a grant would obviously reduce future borrowing. So that would just be one of your considerations as you rank. We don't need a hard fast rule, you should think about it.
But if you rank in the capital plan, you're assigning that for multiple years. So maybe in year 3, you've got something, but all of a sudden you've got a grant opportunity. That's just the flexibility that I would look for.
Of course there's flexibility. We just want you to think about it.
Yeah, okay, I'm with you.
Yeah, I
Okay.
said it.
Going on to page 17, the capital project costs should include all the expenditures or items that are needed to put capital assets into being, to be built, and can include but are not limited to. And that's just to make sure we're doing good estimates. Again, standard, this is nothing creative. you find this in almost every policy. Capital financing, Amy thought we could remove that, I'm okay with that if you wanna take that out, cause we do that. Monitoring of progress reports, I put it in our current practice. The finance director, town manager, and department heads are responsible for monitoring and reporting the progress and completion of capital projects. The
Do we
finance
have
director.
preferred financing methods versus?
What?
Do we have preferred financing methods versus others? Or just always-
Well, so that's a great question. Some people will say definitely wanna reduce the number of bonding, other people will say we want intergenerational equity, those who use it should contribute to the project. So we have not generally done that, other than our policy limit bonding to 7% of operating budget.
Yeah,
We could give that some thought, I mean, we can,
yeah, I mean, you know, the things that are enumerated are probably the things that are more preferable, anything in the other, I mean, you could make this a policy. You know, other needs to really be considered to make sure that it's, other than just saying, we'll figure, you know, I don't mind leaving this in there,
okay.
even though it's not
So maybe
policy
like
per se.
change the wording, cause this just lists them as like financing sources, maybe like preferable financing,
What's this excluding?
nothing.
Others. I don't know.
No,
It's at
others
the
is in
bottom,
there.
others is there.
That's what I'm saying,
Bribery.
you know.
ARPA two,
What?
ARPA two.
ARPA two,
Yeah.
it's
That's
extending
under
ARPA two.
Is it under grant?
That's grants.
I don't know, I mean, somebody comes through and just as an example, not a, you know, saying, hey, you need to do this with Bitcoin or something like that, you say,
Right.
you know,
Well, we can take out the other, I mean, we could.
no, I would leave the
Oh.
other, but I was just saying, you know, I mean,
Well,
there's
we
no,
can leave
This
it.
is recommended by.
Is there any harm in keeping it in, Amy or Mark, that you can think of? Okay, we'll just keep it in for
No,
now.
I was just saying though, to Todd's point though, do you want to list them in order of preference?
no, I mean, you could just say traditional methods typically include the following,
That's
you know,
good,
others can
add
be
do traditional
others can be considered,
as recommended by the finance director.
yeah,
Do
something
that
like
so that we have a reasonableness tied to it.
You know,
Okay.
it just seems like the kind of thing that, you know, a lot of it is very technical around here, but that's the one that's really gonna come down to.
I think there's a new Trump Bitcoin we could, yeah. Okay, sorry, I couldn't help that. Alright,
Lisa Coin.
then monitoring, this is what we do it at quarterly reports, we monitor it, we get updates, no change there other than what we're getting. Based on, you know, an informed determined by the Board of Finance, I think people are comfortable with the form we have, right? Gives you sufficient information, Mark, as well.
Yep.
Comfortable with it, okay. Then we get into the reserve funds that we have there. What I did here is we are only authorized to have this reserve fund because the Connecticut legislature has authorizing language. So I literally copied the words from the legislature and there, Amy pointed out, we don't technically use it for reval or the planning document, but we could.
POCD.
Yeah, the POCDs. So I just kept it in there because it's authorizing language by the state statute. We don't have to do it, but it's there as an option. You know, again, give that some thought. We're not gonna vote on it tonight, so just think about it. And I'm open to changing that, but again, it was the kitchen sink approach. I just put it in because that's what the statute said. Then down at the bottom, D, the town shall endeavor to maintain fund balance in this fund, so the capital reserve of at least 200. How did I come up with that number? I pulled it out of a hat. We have, originally it was written as 50,000. Glastonbury uses 500. I thought, okay, 200's in the middle. I didn't know what the number was. If someone has a better number, we do have sufficient general fund reserves. It could be 0. But I thought that there should be something because we have something that breaks every year. And it usually is in the range of 60 to 200. So I just kept that there. But we can change that. So give some thought to your comfort levels there. And then it just goes into what are the capital funds, what are they used for, capital project funds, and for major capital, 250 and above, that's just where when you approve a project, the money goes in there and then they expend it from it. Capital non-recurring, same thing. It also accounts though for the traditional payback, and so I put in the dollar amounts and then, cause that's what they are right now by the Board of Finance, and if we ever change that, we would then change the policy. But it's like TAR, same every year, LoSiP every year. traditional payback, so we can change that as we want to. Then the accounting guidelines are the same. Amy changed proceeds to premiums. I think we had proceeds in the last, we're putting in premiums, but this is what we always do. Again, no change there. Going on to page 21, so Amy, you have our interest funds going to the general fund and not staying with the capital. Do we wanna change that?
It's up to you guys if you wanna add the interest revenue to build up in that capital reserve fund, or you use it the way we're using it now in the general fund and use it as a tax offset essentially.
So we could keep that just in the general fund and then make the transfer later. That would probably give us the most flexibility. Some towns
You
do
could do that.
segregate the interest from a particular area to that fund, but this, doing it Amy's way, I think will give us more flexibility. We can always put it in there later, so I agree with that suggestion. And we don't actually have a debt service fund, so I added that and Amy correctly pulled that out. Now here's the interesting thing that comes up. And Bert, can you read Town Charter 812G for us? It's on page 21.
Yes, I see it. Appropriations for construction or for other permanent improvements from whatever source derived shall not lapse until the purpose for which the appropriation was made shall have been accomplished or abandoned, provided any such project shall be deemed to have been abandoned if 3 fiscal years shall elapse without any expenditure from or encumbrances of the appropriations therefore. Any portion of an annual appropriation remaining unexpended and unencumbered at the close of the fiscal year shall lapse.
Okay, so I called Mary Glassman, who is a former Board of Finance member, obviously a former First Selectman, and I called Paul Hinault, who was chair of the Board of Finance for the last 18 years. So I thought I wanted to get a balanced sort of perspective on this. And what they pointed out to me, and again, this is kind of new because we haven't really had capital reserve funds for many, many years, is for vehicles, equipment, and stuff like that, they just do those as annual appropriations because the charter really limits the 3-year thing to construction or other permanent improvements, and vehicles and equipment don't fall into that. We saw in our last capital update that a lot of the CNR projects, vehicles, stuff like that, were approved 2 years ago and never bought, so they may be reprioritized. If we limit it to the 1-year annual, it doesn't mean they go away. It means the appropriation goes away. The money's still in capital reserves. If it's still a top priority, it just gets reappropriated. Or we can extend the appropriation and would just require coming to us. So that's one thing to think about. The reason why Mary and Paul mentioned to me that they thought that would be a good idea to return to that practice is because you're appropriating money that you don't need, and that's taking away from money that you might actually need. So it's just a way to sort of monitor. And it doesn't mean you can always do it, it's your money. It's not gonna be spent anywhere else. It goes back to capital reserves. If you decide you need it next year, you just reappropriate it. Or to Amy's point, if we have another pandemic or a nuclear war, and it takes a while to get materials, this board can extend the appropriation beyond the year, make it 18 months if we need to do that too. So it just gives some flexibility. We can do that also through our budget motions each year. So just in having read the charter, because you're doing charter revision, I happened to read it, and for this policy I was like, oh, this is a little different than what we've been doing. So one thing to think about, give that some thought. Moving on to the capital financing plan. Again, capital asset definition. Oh no, where's the bulk purchases? Amy,
That was in the beginning.
was it? Did I miss that? Wanna make sure I get that too.
If you go to page 23, which you're probably closest to, so there's a draft in there that has like the red lines, and then there's like a clean draft, which is the difference between the 2 draft copies.
Yeah.
If you go to page 23, item B, it's the last bullet.
I thought this was the existing document.
That's behind the draft policy, so there,
Next.
If you look at the cover memo, there's the draft policy in a red line version, a draft policy in a clean version, and then the two policies that are being replaced.
I did have, I'm sorry, can you help, what page are you seeing the bulk stuff? I just wanna make sure.
Page 23, item B.
Oh, it's also on page 11.
Yep.
Okay, so go to page 11 at the bottom. This is what Mark was interested in. Group purchases, capital expenditures, and this I took out of, I can't remember, I think it was GASB or GFOA, I can't remember. Capital expenditures are best applied to individual items rather than to groups of similar items like desks and tables, unless the effect of doing so would be to eliminate a significant portion of total capital assets. For example, a large order of library books meant to outfit or expand the library facility may be aggregated for capitalization, but ongoing acquisitions to replace volumes and keep the collection up to date should not. So in other words, if you build a new school like Squadron, you need to fund the library, books could be included in the bonding proposal because it would be an asset to begin to fund it. But as you replace the books, they would not, because they're individually, they're at a lower level. So that gives a little bit of flexibility to Mark. I know Mark would like more flexibility, but it doesn't mean you can do that. We do right now, major truck over 250 can go out to bond. Under 250, we would use cash or the traditional payback level. So that's something I know Mark wanted us to give some thought to, so I'll put it out there for you guys to think about as we get back to that one.
I think Mark wanted to make a point about this.
Yeah,
Just for clarity, you know, if you've got a limit of 250 and you can't you can't combine individual items to get to that threshold. I think this came to our attention in last year's budgeting process because of pressure on CNR. If you can't bond for it, it's CNR or operating. I mean, those are the only three options you have. So if you've got $100,000 roof repair at Eno, you can't bond for it. You put it in CNR with the traditional payback, you've just eaten up a whole lot of that. And then that pressure on CNR is likely, as we saw in our workshop tonight, it's likely to continue. If you can find 2 or 3 roofs that you need to do, and it's, let's say in your capital plan, particularly on the school side, you've pushed out one, you don't wanna do them historically, you know, Matt has said, well, we wouldn't wanna do them all in 1 year. Well, you would if you could, you might have said that because you're only relying on CNR ability to do it. If you bond for it, you get the synergy of doing maybe, and this is just one example, it won't be the best one, but you know, do 2 roofs and you get to 250, you bond it, you're taking that pressure out of CNR. You're also potentially bidding it in a way that your roofing company has got 2 gigs rather than 1, albeit different buildings. And I think, you know, that was kind of the discussion, that was one example of what we were talking about, so.
so Amy, if you could reach out to some of our peer groups and the local GFOA and get any recommendations they have, or if there are other towns that do it similarly, just something for us to evaluate, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I think those were the main things, but do take a little bit of time to read this and make sure that people are comfortable with the things in there. And again, this is not like my typical one where I usually give you something that I've vetted. This was really a kitchen sink, trying to get everything out there since I knew we were doing capital. So it does need more work than usual. So the next draft will be the draft that we'll look at and then hopefully approve it in August or September. So again, very slow, so we'll have time to evaluate it, but wanted to sort of get that for your attention. Let me just make sure of that.
Well, thank you for aggregating all of it into this, cause it does help to have so much here to be able to really grind on.
Yeah, and we tried to add the stuff, the narrative in the charter too, and the GFOA, cause a lot of this is really cookie cutter, but it's all over the place, so we tried to put it in one document. It's not creative stuff, it's really just taking best practices, but and then the one of the things I talked about with Amy and Mark, at some point we should talk about what we want in the capital sheets when they're given to us. And I know for me, one thing that's very important, especially in light of the amount of uncommitted fund is projections on start dates and completion dates. Even if you don't hit them, it would be good to have those included in the project sheet so that we can sort of monitor how we're doing. And that's a good performance metric. How many are we hitting? How many are over? That will tell us how well we're evaluating our time management and our estimates and stuff like that. That's a great performance metric. But so give some thought to that. So those were the major things that we had there. Anything else? You're laughing, I know. I'll give it to Bert to do the editing once we get everyone's final stuff. Okay, we'll move on. We do have a supplemental appropriation. Amy, is there anything else you wanna add or anything else we should think about? Okay. All right, so we have before us a supplemental appropriation that was approved by the Board of Selectmen last night. There's one correction to this submission. It mentions that it was approved in fiscal year 2024, which would have meant it was approved 2 years ago, and it would beg the question, why did it take 2 years to do this top priority? But that was incorrect. It was actually approved last year, so it's within the fiscal year, so that makes a lot more sense. When I called Mark, he was able to confirm that that was just a typo. Alright, so Mark, you or Amy, do you wanna just give us the background there and then we'll
This one's real brief, I think, and they did, Adam covered for Tom Roy last night at the Board of Selectmen meeting, but you know, we've got the this is the primary air conditioning unit for the Simsbury Public Library. They found one or two condensers that were leaking significantly. They had prior work planned and you know, they've taken a look at the cost of this and we're gonna be a little bit short. That's why the supplemental is before you tonight, but you know, I've been asked to indicate again, as they did last night, that time is of the essence because without this, the risk of failure is imminent. I'm
And the-
happy to take any questions.
the funding recommendation is from
Capital reserves.
Amy says capital reserves and year-end savings that they're after.
well, it's essentially a transfer because you're returning 500,000, so instead of doing the accounting nightmare of doing the transfer, we'll take it from capital reserves and replenish it upon closeout since we have a
I was just asked by a Board of Selectmen member why do that as opposed to using year-end savings, and I provided that answer as well, just it's cleaner,
it's just easier.
right? But essentially it's, you
The
know,
same thing.
right, and I think the question that was posed to me was, you know, can departments use year-end savings, you know, discretionary to fix things, and the answer is no. I mean, whatever we need to do with that or capital reserves is subject to board approval, so this is something that actually came from DPW, not the library, is a critical repair, and I just wanted to make that point too. It's not
And
the
this does,
library question.
and this also involves funds coming from, not from the department.
From the department.
It's coming from a different fund, so it's it's both.
Somebody reminded me, Chair, that there'll be some efficiencies too, because you know, it's the unit being replaced is 19 years old, so you know, in terms of the impact of that, that's a good thing.
Does anyone have any questions on that? It's essentially a transfer, but instead of doing the accounting nightmare, we'll just do it out of capital reserves and then put it back in capital reserves in a month or October.
So what's the amount of the?
The amount is 22,500. So are there any other questions? I'll ask for a motion effective June 17, 2025 to approve a supplemental appropriation from the capital reserve fund for the purchase of a replacement air conditioning unit at the library in the amount of 22,500.
So moved.
Second.
Go with Bert on the second, Mike on the first. All in favor, please say aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Chair.
And then
So
we
if it only
have-
costs 21,500, where's the extra 1,000?
then it doesn't get, then it stays in capital reserves.
And if it comes to
It gets closed down.
23,500?
What?
And it comes to 23?
They cannot spend it,
Okay, so the little plus minus here in the text is,
not in the motion though.
okay, that's what I did.
Yeah, that's a cap. Appropriations are caps, so not a penny can be spent over that without coming for a supplemental appropriation. But I am confident they will not need it. Okay.
You don't want moldy books.
Right. Okay, but if it's under, they don't have authority to spend it elsewhere, because that would be a transfer, and that would still have to come back to us, so it just goes back to capital reserve, the fund from where it came. Okay, then we have the minutes. I think there was just one small change and I forgot to send it to you, Amy. There was an E missing in the word the. And I can't remember where, but I'll find that for you and send it to you.
I'll find it.
On page 44, under C, the report is filed in the town clerk's office. It's just TH. That was the only change I had. I thought the minutes were very well done. Thank you for that. I don't know if folks had a chance to read the communication that we got from our assessor, but it's excellent. It really gives a great summary of where our grant list is, where we get our money from, how it's broken up. It's a wonderful, wonderful example. I wanna commend Francine. I don't know, Amy, if you helped her do that, but whoever worked
That was
on
all
that.
Francine.
It was really, really well done, and I encourage all members of the public to take a look at that. It's on page 46 through 51. I sent it to the chair of economic development because it's very much related to that. Really, really easy to understand, so take a look at that. And then Mark, do we have a date for the tri-board capital?
We do not, as far as I know. We should get together on that and pencil something in.
Okay, we think it'll be in July or August?
August?
August? That's better for me.
I know everybody's got some vacation plans, but we'll be ready.
Okay, so we'll,
Not that it matters, I have 3 big work projects in August, so August might be tough for me, but I hopefully will be able to join remotely or something along those lines.
okay, we'll try and work around
Plus 2
everyone's-
tri-boards in 1 year might be too much for me.
Might be more than we can.
I know. Well, this will be
Just
a working one, we don't have to do
Yes.
that much
Burn
work
out
for
the
this one.
circuits.
Yeah, right.
Alright, no, we have a good base, for members of the public, we did have a workshop where we went through some very detailed Excel spreadsheets. Amy, could you email us copies of that Excel so we can play with it?
Yeah, that would be awesome.
You need a big screen to play with that one, Chair.
I need like 7 screens, yeah, that's a hard one. But we're starting to look at scenarios for members of the public, how we would plan for a major capital project, whether that's a school project or a town project, but a large project that requires bonding, which could spike a mill rate, and how we would mitigate a mill rate spike and plan for that over a longer period of 10 to 15 years. So we're starting to evaluate that process. Alright.
Did you all approve the minutes?
Haven't.
May I have a motion to approve the minutes with the addition of the letter E?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion's carried unanimously. Alright,
I'll abstain.
is there anything else for the good of the order?
One abstention.
What?
One abstention on the minutes because we
Oh,
didn't print it.
okay. Mike, did you have any updates on the housing thing for us, or is that?
Gosh, I'm embarrassed to say, have we published yet? Or we are in the process of publishing?
We have, it's actually up on the live website, and if anybody wants a printed copy, I've got some in my office. When we break, I'd be glad to give them to you. And Mike, I should thank you publicly for your work on that committee. And we reported out to the Board of Selectmen in a couple of months ago now, and last night at the Board of Selectmen meeting, the chair had put on the agenda a brief discussion about the first of those 9 recommendations that came out of committee. This had to do with potential development of town-owned land, and there was a vibrant discussion about that at the Board of Selectmen meeting. For anybody who wants to watch that, it was certainly interesting. So I can report that the commission worked for about a year. They synthesized 75 recommendations coming from around the globe, and got it down to 9 actionable items, 3 of which have already been done in large measure by zoning that was working alongside that effort. And so the remaining 6 kind of run the gamut, and the Board of Selectmen took up the first of those 6 just last night. So I think it's moving forward. Certainly thanks to everybody who participated in it, because all of our boards and commissions were represented on that committee. So
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, it was a really interesting process, and thank you for eloquently stating all that, cause I would not have been able to get all that out.
yeah, I think we tried to focus on things that the town could actually do. So, we just eliminated things that, required state enabling legislation that might not happen, or required huge funding that this board couldn't do, you know. So that I think the 6 that remain are actionable if our leaders wanna move forward on any of those, so we gave them some good advice.
So that's done?
Yeah.
Alright. Anything else? Alright, have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thanks, everyone.
For over 40 years, SCM has been the voice of our town.
Bringing us together through local programming,
Education and live broadcasts.
SEM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community.
Ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings.
And celebrating milestones.
like our high school graduations.
But today, SEM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions.
And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SCM receives less revenue.
Even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open.
Continues to educate our youth.
And keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SCM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive.
For generations to come.
Visit our website
Or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
Counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media.
where your town
Your schools and
and your government come together.